That evening, the rain dropped in thick, relentless sheets. Elia had tried to keep her cool, even as guilt tore at her insides in their tasteful suburban house. Idris, her husband, had always been the obedient kind, bungler's dependable, dull. Her peace of mind had come from his consistency. But over time, the silence of their marriage started to feel like a prison. Elia yearned for excitement, something to break the monotony. Idris was too predictable, too happy with their daily grind. She next met Andrei. He was not at all like Idris, impulsive, magnetic, and dangerously exciting. Their affair started as a brief getaway, but quickly became a web she couldn't untangle herself from, and one she didn't want. Elia had evolved. She no longer yearned for the life of subdued satisfaction Idris suggested. Andrei lived passionately every day, and in the back of her mind she questioned what life might be without Idris. Friends, sorry to interrupt, but please help me reach 2,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. Let's keep going. That was the very idea that tormented her on the evening everything went terribly wrong. Idris had faced her, but not via an angry outburst or a screaming fight. No, it turned out to be worse. As he shared his knowledge of her affair, he was cool, icy even. Idris said, his voice calm, but betraying years of hurt known about you and him. Elia's gut dropped. She had underlined Idris. For weeks he had been compiling data, tracking her phone's GPS, and observing her growingly dubious behavior on social media. He was unaware, meanwhile, of the extent her resentment had developed. Elia had arrived at a point beyond return. 2 days later, Idris vanished from sight. The police started an official inquiry a week after his disappearance. Elia first performed the part of the worried wife quite brilliantly. Her friends, neighbors, and even the police officials who spoke with her thought Idris's sudden absence broke her heart. He had simply disappeared after a normal morning run, she informed the investigators, leaving no trace. The research ground still for a few days. Idris had no past of erratic behavior or any cause to leave without notice. His lab mates at the university where he worked had great things to say about him. Idris, a scientist renowned for his exacting standards, had no enemies, and his personal life had always seemed, by all reports, steady. Things then started to change, though. There came in an anonymous tip. Found abandoned in a remote woodland area just outside the edge of town. Idris's car had days of searching the area. The police sipped through the thick underbrush in search of a lead. They discovered finally something much worse than they had anticipated. Tucked under a patch of recently disturbed ground, search dogs taught to identify cadavers strike on a point. Recently turned over, the dirt was still loose. Within hours, they found the body, Idris still sporting his jogging attire, lying under the ground. The bruises on his neck revealed a fierce struggle. Most likely using the same hands that had promised to love him, he had been strangled. The inquiry turned right away from a missing persons case to one of homicide. Associated to the case was Detective Lena Morales. Morales, a seasoned investigator well known for her tenacity, wasted no time going back over Idris's last days. Not long before Elia's front started to fall apart, she had presented a convincing performance of grief, but her account ran counterintuitive. Little things like her inability to remember particular elements of Idris's schedule or her seeming anxiety upon learning of his relationships outside of their marriage. Then there were her text messages, deleted and quickly deleted, but fragments persisted. Morales was right when her gut told her something seemed strange. The link to Andrei came to light during an Idris phone record digital forensic sweep, a series of late-night calls, all under a name Idris had never mentioned in his social circle. Andrei soon became clear as the man Idris had found in Elia's hidden life. The police started to put the events together. Idris had confronted Elia, knowing about her affair, and it had become a turning point. But was this more sinister, or merely a crime of passion? Morales dug further, and another damning piece of evidence surfaced. A life insurance policy in Idris's name, lately changed with Elia, as the sole beneficiary. It seemed that the payoff would be sufficient to release Alaya and her boyfriend. Now, the study had a goal, and everyone turned to Alaya. She wasn't ready to submit, though. Not just yet. Alaya stayed cool under duress as detectives pushed forward, asking her about her relationship with Andre. She told Morales, "I don't know what you're talking about," with a trained look of incredulity. Although Idris and I struggled, I loved him, but Morales knew better. The next phase would be vital, connecting Andre and Alaya to the murder. Morales also knew without a doubt that the secret to the entire matter was the complex relationship Alaya had tried so hard to keep under control. Detective Morales had little time to crack the perfect picture of Alaya, though Morales sensed something deeper, something far more calculating behind the forced tears and measured tone. Her performance as the bereaved widow was a masterful display. Alaya's story lost consistency with every interview that went by. What first appeared to be little differences now revealed more major, intentional fabrications. The real concern was how far Alaya had gone, and had Andre been a willing helper. The forensics team had already found that Idris's death was not an accident. The bruises on his neck suggested a struggle, one too strong for an opportunistic crime or a random attack. Idris had battled back knowing his killer. The idea tore at Morales, particularly once he learned of Alaya's affair with Andre. Deeper she dug, the more it seemed that the motivation was greed rather than only passion. Idris had a heavy life insurance policy, and recent changes in it helped Alaya more than in past years. The payoff was a small fortune, enough for Alaya and Andre to begin a fresh life free from the daily restrictions of her marriage to Idris. Still, proving that was difficult, though. For a conviction, suspicion was insufficient. Morales decided to bring Andre in for interrogation next. Morales thought Andre might be the secret to getting Alaya to break, since his name had shown enough frequency in her letters to call attention. Andre, a fitness instructor with a history of brief flings, was a complete contrast to the deliberate image of Alaya. Andre was cool when the detectives first approached him, acting surprised at being contacted about Idris. "I barely knew the guy," he said, shrugging it off with a slushful of conceit. But the gaps started to show when Morales pushed him on his relationship with Alaya. "You would have me believe that you had no bearing on Idris's passing," watching Andre closely for his response, Morales asked. He stopped, his poise wavering for a split second. "Look, whatever Alaya and I had was simply, it was hardly a major concern. They were finished," she told me. "About her husband, I knew nothing until after he vanished." Morales knew that was a lie. Even after Idris had confronted Andre about the affair, the call logs kept Andre and Alaya in continual contact. More sinister, just hours from the time of death, Andre's car had been seen by a traffic camera close to the scene of Idris's death. Morales leaned forward with a low but strong voice. "She will leave you out to dry the minute things get tough, even if you believe you are safeguarding her. She already made sure that, should something go wrong, your fingerprints on this rather than hers." Andre moved uneasily, his arrogance beginning to break. "She said she would handle it," he mumbled. "She said we would be together once it was over." Morales needed enough to drive further. Experience taught her that once someone like Andre felt imprisoned, they would try to free themselves. "Together, huh?" Morales let the words hang in the air. "If you go down for this, do you honestly believe she would wait for you? Alternatively, do you believe she will move on in the same way she did with Idris?" Silence from Andre told her everything. He was only a pawn caught in a much more expansive plan, driven by Alaya, not the genius here. Morales realized now that Alaya had probably coerced Andre into following the scheme, giving him hope they could lead happy lives free from influence from Idris. Andre was only one source, though. Morales also had Idris's phone records, which showed a far more personal pattern even though they were erased of incriminating messages. Before his death, Idris had phoned Alaya, not a friend or a colleague. Maybe in a last-ditch effort to make peace before things descended into darkness, he had tried to talk to her. Alia's actions during the days before the murder also presented a negative picture. Family home CCTV footage revealed her leaving at strange times, sometimes in the dead of night, then usually returning just before dawn. She had gone to great lengths to hide her tracks, but she hadn't considered the minute details. A neighbor's security camera catching her car pulling out of the driveway late at night, or the foreign car, later identified as Andre's, parked 2 streets over. The emphasis turned back to Alia's deliberate manipulation as Morales made connections. She had wanted him gone, taken from her life totally, without the messy complications of a divorce or a scandal. It was insufficient for her to just cheat on Idris. Andre had been the ideal friend, too naive to see he was being used. He had been fascinated enough to go with whatever she advised. But now, under increasing pressure, Alia was starting to feel the walls close in around her. The study went beyond merely compiling physical data these days. Morales knew Andre was the weak link. She needed a confession, something that would link Alia exactly to the murder. Alia would have no one left to hide behind, should he flip. Did she not make you believe it was all for love? Playing on Andre's worries, Morales asked, her voice softening. But let me tell you, Andre, she doesn't give a damn about you. Should she have, she would have spared dragging you into this mess. She is playing for you, and she will vanish, and you will be left carrying the bag when all falls apart. Andre took a hard swallow, his face white. It appeared for the first time that he was thinking about Morales being right. In the poorly lit interrogation room, Andre sat across from Morales, his choice weighing on him like a physical force. Running his short, cropped hair through his hands, they shook just a little. The room remained silent, broken only by the soft buzz of the overhead light. Ever calm, Morales let the tension develop, knowing full well that silence was usually more successful than any question. Andre was not a hardened criminal. He was not someone designed to bear this kind of strain. A crack had developed the instant Morales mentioned Alia was preparing him, and now it was widening with every minute. Andre said at last, his voice hardly above a whisper. She remarked. She claimed that was the only way. He would never let her go, that if we did nothing, we would never be together. His words poured out in a flood of guilt and uncertainty, the facade of confidence he had once wore collapsing in real time. Slightly leaning forward, Morales urged him to keep with a little nod. She felt this was it, the breakthrough she had been waiting for. She came to me after he found out, Andre said, his eyes darting to the floor as if embarrassed of his part in the tragedy. Idris told her he knew about us, confronted her. She claimed he wouldn't stop, so ruining everything, but I'm not sure how he found out, she fretted. At least she appeared to be afraid. Morales's keen eyes missed no change in Andre's tone. Now there was uncertainty, doubt that Alia had ever been terrified, doubt that she had ever meant to keep her word to him. Andre, what did she say? Morales asked, her voice cool but firm. How did it come about? Panic flickering in Andre's eyes. The weight of his own complicity sank in. I wanted not to hurt him, I swear. I never sought this. But she warned me. He was dangerous. He never left her alone. And that, should we not act first, he might even hurt her. And you thought she was real, keeping her tone neutral? Morales asked. Andre said, I loved her. The words sharp and edged. At least, I thought I did. She informed me we could start over somewhere fresh, far from all of this, and be free. She was lying, though. She had a history of lying. Morales nodded, knowing how readily Andre could have been controlled. To support what Alia wanted, freedom and financial gain, she had fed him a narrative of a dangerous, domineering husband and had performed on his emotions. Blinded by infatuation, Andre had followed her as she had painted herself as a victim, distorting the truth to suit her own story. What happened the evening Idris vanished? Morales pressed, her voice gentle but unrelenting. Ask me everything. As Andre started to relate the evening of the murder, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his guilt. We had been planning for days, chatting, or at least she was organizing. At first, I considered it as just her way of venting, just talk. She then began to get serious, telling me where we might visit and how much money she would have once his absence was over. The pulse of Morales sped up. She needed admission of this kind. Elia had planned the crime from beginning, not been a passive observer of it. Then that night, Andre said, his voice faltering, she called me, said Idris had left for his run, and this presented our opportunity. I tried to back off, but she urged me, not wanting to do it. She said she would do it herself if I didn't assist, and subsequently, we would both be caught. I thus headed. Morales still said nothing, allowing Andre to narrate the story at his own speed. She could feel the guilt and the regret, but Andre's turning back now was too late. He had already stretched the bounds. I drove to the place she told me, Andre said, his voice hollow now, as though he were cut off from the events he was recounting. She was waiting there, close to the forest, where Idris used to run. I'm not sure what came over me, but when I saw him descending the road, all I could think about was her. How she said we could be happy. How she made it sound like it was the only path. Andre's hands tightened into fists on the table. The memory of that instant, imprinted in his brain. I took him. That was not meant to go that far. I simply wanted to frighten him and drive him away, but she was there telling me to finish it and screaming at me. I stumbled in thinking, and it was finished before I knew it. He lay still on the ground. As Andre stopped talking, the room sank into a heavy quiet. Morales inhaled deeply, organizing all she had recently heard. She needed this confession, but one more piece of the jigsaw remained. After that, what did Elia do? She questioned softly. Andre raised his head, his eyes ablaze with both terror and resentment. She showed no flinch at all. She told me to assist her in burying him, like it was little, like it did not even matter. Morales needed just that to hear. Later that afternoon, Elia was arrested and brought in without incident. In the same interrogation room, she sat across from Morales with an incomprehensible look. Elia resisted breaking even as the evidence grew against Andre. His confession, the insurance policy, the CCTV footage. She denied everything, asserting Andre had behaved on his own, and she had no idea what he was capable of. The evidence was overwhelming, though, and Elia's composed behavior had little effect in persuading anyone of her innocence. Morales had seen it before, that kind of cold calculation, driven only by someone believing they were smarter than everyone else. Charging both Elia and Andre with conspiracy to commit murder, the prosecution moved quickly. Andre's testimony, which detailed how Elia had coerced him into believing they could have a future together if only Idris were out of the way, became the cornerstone of the case as it developed in court. Finally, Elia's well-crafted web of lies came apart, revealing her for the woman she really was, a woman ready to turn on her lover and husband in order to meet her own self-serving needs. With great media coverage and public interest, the trial of Elia and Andre became the buzz of the town. The public's imagination was captured by an apparently normal woman whose cold and calculated acts resulted in the horrific murder of her husband. Although both defendants were accused of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, Andre's participation was obvious, and the emphasis soon turned to Elia, the crime's motivating agent. Elia remained cool from the start of the trial. Well paid and painstakingly ready, her defense team contended that Andre had acted alone, motivated by jealousy and an obsession with obsession. And, they said, Elia had been caught in a loveless, controlling marriage and had comfort in a little affair. She had never meant for things to advance this far, though. The defense presented her as a victim of circumstance, an emotionally manipulated woman who had lost control of a situation spiraling beyond her reach. Conversely, Andre had turned state's witness, a move that startled those who had thought of him as always loyal to Aaliyah. Presenting him as a man who had been profoundly in love and misled by a calculating woman, his attorney argued for compassion. From Aaliyah's claim that Idris was a threat to their future to Andre's insistence that the only fix was to permanently eliminate him, Andre's testimony set out the whole terrible story. As Andre testified, his voice shook as he described how Aaliyah had deftly persuaded him into committing a crime he hardly understood. "She told me Idris would never let us be together," he said on the witness stand, his eyes downcast. "She said he would pull everything away from us if I did nothing. She seemed to have loved me. Still, looking back, I see she loved only herself." Playing on Andre's emotional testimony, the prosecution presented Aaliyah as the mastermind behind the whole operation. They presented the proof in terrible detail. The phone calls Aaliyah and Andre had on the evening of Idris's murder, the deleted books, the life insurance policy. The prosecution said that Aaliyah saw her husband as an obstacle rather than as a partner, and that her cold, methodical preparation reflected this, not only for her affair with Andre, but also for the financial windfall Idris's death would bring, a barrier that needed to be taken down. Additionally called to testify was Morales, the investigator who had opened the case. The trial revolved mostly on her methodical destruction of Aaliyah's alibi and the forensic proof connecting her to the crime scene. But Aaliyah sealed her doom with her own actions in court. Aaliyah's cold attitude unsettled the jury even with her defense team working tirelessly. She barely flinched when the prosecution revealed the graphic facts of Idris's death, showed little feeling when her lover admitted to their crime, and kept an air of superiority all through the proceedings. This coldness worked against her. The jury observed not a victim, but a woman who had planned a murder, and felt no guilt for the man she had promised to love and guard. The prosecution was unreserved in closing arguments, their voices steady and intentional. Aaliyah had everything to gain and nothing to lose, they said. This was not a passion crime. This was intentional. This dealt with power, with control, with greed. She intended to leave with a fresh life free of consequences, used Andre as a weapon, coached him into doing her dirty work, and walked away. Insisting that Aaliyah's relationship with Andre was complex and that she had no intention of hurting her husband, the defense sought to counter, finding herself in overreach. "Aaliyah made poor decisions," her lawyer said, "but she is not a murderer. She could not have imagined what Andre would do." Still, the jury was not persuaded. 2 days of thought later, they returned bearing their decision. On all counts, first-degree murder and conspiratorial murder, Aaliyah was found guilty. The sentence was life in prison without chance for release. Andre, who had helped the prosecution and testified against her, was sentenced 25 years for his part in the crime. Turning on Aaliyah had won him some forgiveness, but not enough to get him out from under the results of his deeds. Aaliyah stayed mute as the decision was announced, her face a mask of apathy. She seemed to break only when the courtroom started to empty, when the reality of her fate settled in. She had a flutter of something for the first time, regret maybe, or fear. But it was too late. Her carefully scheduled life vanished, replaced by the frigid, uncompromising walls of a prison cell. Andre, for his part, seemed hollowed out, a shell of the man he once was. Although his sentence meant decades behind bars, his testimony had spared him the same destiny as Aaliyah. The weight of his deeds and the knowledge he had taken a life would follow him for the rest of his days. Aftermath: a legacy of betrayal. The media frenzy over the case subsided in the months following the trial, leaving a society trying to make sense of the catastrophe. Idris had been a man whose quiet life as a scientist had been cut short by a betrayal none had seen. He had been well liked. His friends and colleagues paid a memorial in his honor, a somber gathering more suited for the loss of a decent man than for the scandal consuming the town. Aaliyah's name came to be associated with cold-blooded treachery, a warning story about how avarice and selfishness might ruin lives. Elia's attempts to challenge her conviction in jail found little success. Her reputation as the master planner guaranteed that she would spend her lifetime behind bars. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Though spared the same destiny, Andre battled his own demons. Elia had used him, but he had also made decisions on his own, decisions taken that resulted in the death of an innocent man. The guilt tormented him even with the shortened sentence. Time spent would not alter what he had done. Having closed one of the most difficult cases of her career, Detective Morales went back to her regular work. But Aaliyah and Idris stayed with her. It served as a reminder of how readily love could become something far darker, and how secrets capable of shattering everything could lie beneath the surface of an apparently ideal life. Ultimately, Aaliyah's deeds left a legacy of damage for everyone who had known Idris and Andre, as well as for them. Once based on love and trust, a marriage was now a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition for wealth, power, and control eclipses the worth of a human life, a symbol of betrayal and greed. A sobering reminder that not all betrayals are born of passion. Some are created in the dark recesses of a heart that knows only ambition. The tale of Alia's cold manipulation and Idris's terrible death would never really be forgotten. Years went by, and the world moved past the dramatic trial of Alia and Andre. But the wounds they left behind persisted. Those who knew Idris carried on his memory, his quiet genius and compassion, in sharp contrast to the betrayal that had snatched his life. Though his colleagues carried on his research, frequently citing his work, everyone who had depended on his knowledge and consistent presence felt his absence very strongly. Alia changed to fit her new reality in prison. Back behind bars, where she was just another prisoner, her charm and manipulation were useless. She had gambled everything, her marriage, her freedom, her future, and lost. The control she once possessed over others had disappeared. No amount of guile could alter the concrete walls enclosing her now. Andre struggled with his own guilt in meantime. Although it was a hollow triumph, his lowered sentence meant he would taste freedom at last. Every day the guilt tore at him. The picture of Idris's dead body tormented his dreams. Redeeming seemed impossible even with time. Now a seasoned veteran, Detective Morales closed other cases, but often thought back to this one. The complexity of human feeling, love turned into something unidentifiable. It had served as a reminder to her that occasionally the biggest threats originate from people closest to us, rather than from total strangers. Ultimately, Elia's decisions had only resulted in devastation. For Andre, for Idris, the man whose sole transgression was loving the wrong woman. For her as well. The tragedy of the case lay not only in the death itself, but also in the extent someone might fall when corruption of judgment by greed, lust, and betrayal colors their path. The world progressed, but the tale of Alia's treachery stayed, evidence of the sinister paths love can travel when corrupted by selfishness.